On Johnny Carson's show, the 7 most tragic tales from the golden age of Hollywood were unveiled. For 30 years, Johnny Carson brought the world's biggest talents, comedy, and fun straight to your television, making America his living room. He made the country laugh night after night with his humor. However, he never made light of specific Hollywood disasters. He couldn't shake these tales. The fallen stars whose anguish was too great to laugh at. The late-night host never brought up the most troubled times in Hollywood in his monologue, but behind the scenes he did. Studio publicists of the golden age of Hollywood fought tooth and nail to keep 7 terrible stories from Johnny Carson from becoming punchlines. What Johnny learned about these famous people alters our perception of them forever. But before we tell you these tragic tales, there's something you should know about Johnny Carson. Carson, who was known in the public eye as the wittiest comedian, was actually somewhat reclusive and saw Hollywood through the untainted lens of an outsider. Those closest to Johnny paid attention when he spoke gravely about a celebrity's sorrow. They understood he wasn't acting comedically, but rather as one of the most perceptive observers of Hollywood's actual character. Plus, his revelations regarding these 7 iconic figures will alter your perception of their legendary performances indefinitely. When it came to American television, Johnny Carson was in a league of his own. He interviewed more than 22,000 people while sitting behind the Tonight Show desk for 30 years, from 1962 to 1992. Till Carson did more than host discussions, he was the go-to guy for Hollywood A-listers. Sometimes when they were with Johnny, celebrities who were notoriously private would let their guard down, showing fans a side of themselves they rarely showed anywhere else. Like a priest in a confession, Johnny stood watch. Rumor has it that a former NBC executive said that several employees confided in him details they would keep secret. Somehow, being around him allowed even the most reserved people to relax their guard and be themselves. Because of this kind dynamic, Carson was able to learn more about the private lives of Hollywood icons than anyone before. Studio publicity departments presented the public with well-crafted pictures. But Carson frequently observed the humanity, their hardships, regrets, and anguish behind those masks. Carson had a personal understanding of pain. His charismatic public presence belied a complicated man who struggled with issues such as alcoholism and 4 unsuccessful marriages. Perhaps his unique empathy for his fellow performers stems from his own experience of suffering. No punch was ever thrown by Johnny. An ex-Tonight Show writer supposedly said, hate could be merciless with powerful figures who abused their position, but he had a code about people who were suffering. Their pain wasn't material for jokes. It was something he recognized and respected. Carson's ethical boundary was especially clear when he discussed certain tragic figures from Hollywood's golden age. Carson showed remarkable control when talking about celebrities whose lives had taken tragic turns, in contrast to other comedians who may use their tragedies for comedy. Some names would be brought up in our writer room, and Johnny would simply shake his head, the ex-writer added, or he would say, not them. They've suffered enough. It was a boundary he refused to cross. As a result of his position, Carson had unrivaled access to the most famous faces in Hollywood, both during their careers and after they had fallen from glory. He met some at industry gatherings or through common acquaintances. Others he interviewed for his show. As a result of these encounters, he accumulated wisdom that he kept himself, discussing it only with close friends and family on rare occasions. From these behind-the-scenes discussions, a picture of Hollywood develops, one that is drastically different from the glitzy public perception. A place where gifted but defenseless individuals were frequently seen as objects to be used and then discarded. The 7 stories that had the most impact on Carson shed light on the tragic human toll that the entertainment industry's worst practices take. You have never performed this play before, so coming tonight is a big deal.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Plus, it's common to have a packed schedule and a concert to attend when in New York. Judy Garland, the young woman on whom they persisted till she passed out. As Dorothy, Judy Garland became one of Hollywood's most beloved talents and charmed the globe. blessed with a captivating personality that captivated audiences and a voice that could wrench emotions from listeners. The supposed details that Johnny Carson divulged to his closest allies, however, paint a picture of one of the most terrible chapters in the industry's history about that talent. According to Johnny, her eyes revealed the truth, even though she would grin no matter what. According to reports, Carson's longtime pal disclosed. This insight was derived from Carson's personal experiences with Garland during her late career appearances on The Tonight Show. The effects of decades of studio torture were glaringly obvious when Garland sat across from Carson. As based on what Carson shared with trusted associates, he believed that Garland had already disappeared during those performances, reduced to a mere shell of the energetic performer she had been before, obliterated by the industry that had propelled her to success. Tragically, Garland's trouble started when she was a little girl. Studio bosses thought she was too big and unremarkable when she signed with MGM at the tender age of 13. How can we fix this? Administer amphetamines to assist the child maintain a healthy weight and barbiturates to aid with sleep, setting her on a lifelong downward spiral into addiction. Johnny could not forgive it. According to what his acquaintance supposedly informed him, they injected a youngster with drugs to increase her marketability. That kind of treatment has no place in the entertainment industry. The studio's influence went well beyond Garland's performance. She was subjected to intense labor schedules from MGM, with shoots lasting up to 20 hours at times. They would replenish her energy with further stimulants and resume her duties as soon as she passed out from tiredness. Throughout her teenage years, she adhered to this rigorous routine. Substantial time spent undergoing continual psychological and pharmacological manipulation during critical developing years. The studio system's conspiracy to mainstream this treatment was what troubled Carson the most. According to what he supposedly disclosed in private discussions, his confidant told Johnny that the true horror wasn't what they did to her, but rather how her peers justified and condoned it. RX medications were prescribed by medical professionals. The regimen was enforced by her mother. The board of directors did not take any action until the medications took effect. Every part of the system was involved. A terrible toll was taken by this persistent mistreatment. Garland was trying by the time she was in her late 20s. An overdose of barbiturates, a kind of narcotic she had been coerced into using while she was a child performer, ultimately claimed her life at the age of 47. According to reports, Carson considered Garland's story to be one of the most heartbreaking he had ever encountered, despite interviewing thousands of superstars in his career. His companion revealed that Johnny had mentioned that glimpses of the enthusiastic performer she once was might be seen. However, his primary impression was of a person whose soul had been emptied away by years of being seen more as a commodity than a human being. He likened it to being a bystander as someone drowns in front of your eyes. Carson found Garland's narrative especially unsettling because of the discrepancy between her public persona and her private life. Although Judy Garland was beloved by audiences for her portrayal of purity and hope in The Wizard of Oz, the actual Judy Garland had a tragic childhood plagued by abuse and exploitation, which finally took her life at a young age. The confidant stated to Johnny that he didn't think Judy Garland's tragic death was due to her suicide. Because of what they did to her, she managed to survive for a long time. He considered her to be among the most tenacious actors of all time. The damage was too great to be overcome by it. Carson supposedly found especially moving the Hollywood tragedy of a talented actor whose private demons were intertwined with his public persona, in contrast to Garland's narrative, which depicted the exploitation of a child star. Okay, I see your point, but no. The handsome man who couldn't help but be himself, Morgan Cliff. Montgomery Clift's delicate, humanistic performances in landmark films such as Red River, From Here to Eternity, and A Place in the Sun shook up the cinema industry. Generations of actors were impacted by his raw and emotional style. The artistic genius of Cliff, however, had a terrible human cost, as Johnny Carson allegedly revealed to confidence. He possessed both the angelic countenance and the restless spirit of devils. It is said that while talking about Cliff's unfortunate course, Carson made a comment to a buddy. The inability to reconcile his private self with his public image in the restrictive climate of mid-century America was a major source of Cliff's anguish, in contrast to Judy Garland, whose downfall was mostly caused by outside circumstances. Due to Cliff's untimely death in 1966, Carson was unable to interview him during his peak period hosting The Tonight Show. But Carson's Hollywood network allowed him to learn about Cliff's problems via their shared acquaintances and coworkers. Reportedly, Carson seemed very touched by Robert Redford's criticism of Cliff, who Redford said was the actor who made everyone else anxious. Johnny couldn't get enough of Redford's explanation. Reportedly, a Carson confidant disclosed that he realized Cliff's sincerity on stage was disturbing to others around him, since it undermined Hollywood's reliance on artificiality. In a field where appearances are paramount, Cliff's inability to differentiate between actor and audience made him a threat. During a time of extreme homophobia, Cliff's suppressed sexuality caused him intolerable stress. Experts in the field told Carson that Cliff was paranoid about the public finding out about his personal life and how it might affect his work, because he was trying to maintain an untenable double life while under this amount of pressure. He turned to booze and medications. In 1956, Cliff was disfigured in a terrible vehicle accident, which added another dimension to his suffering. The event allegedly did more than simply change Cliff's iconic look, as Carson allegedly informed associates. His already fragile sense of self was shattered. Johnny remarked that Cliff's attractiveness had served as both an entrance to Hollywood and a constraint on him. Even that intricate sanctuary was lost to the confidant following the accident, he revealed. The sad irony that Cliff, whose performances were characterized by their unfiltered emotional honesty, was compelled to lead a life of essential deceit, was purportedly noticed by Carson. According to Carson, Cliff's internal conflict caused what he referred to as an open wound that never healed, a schism that was ultimately unbridgeable. His companion claimed that Johnny always spoke about him in a serious tone. Cliff, in his view, was a victim of a business that encouraged actors to pretend to be vulnerable on film while encouraging total deceit behind closed doors. One of the all-time greats in cinema was ruined by that inconsistency. Carson mourned the senseless loss of Cliff's remarkable potential when he died of heart failure at the age of 45, following a long decline in health brought on by substance misuse. Reportedly, Carson felt Cliff's narrative was a devastating criticism of a system that took advantage of sensitive artists who were also very intelligent, while simultaneously denying them the right to express themselves freely. The tragic tale of another celebrity focused on how the Hollywood machine could devour and trash even its brightest creation, in stark contrast to Cliff's misery, which was mostly caused by the struggle between his true self and societal expectations. A joyous occasion. Being back in my hometown brings me joy. The actress Marilyn Monroe, who Hollywood created and then left behind. One may argue that Marilyn Monroe is the most recognizable face in cinematic history. Her likeness remains a global icon long after she passed away. The real Marilyn was not at all like the self-assured sex icon the public saw, and her terrible demise symbolized Hollywood's ultimate betrayal of its own creation. As Johnny Carson allegedly disclosed to intimate acquaintances, Monroe jokes never made Johnny laugh. An ex-employee of The Tonight Show allegedly revealed that he had told her she was the most lonely lady who had ever brought light into a room. As Carson drew this conclusion after speaking with Monroe at industry gatherings and, more importantly, after having private conversations with mutual associates who knew the real woman behind the picture and could attest to her authenticity. The part of Monroe's story that really got to Carson, according to what he allegedly told close friends and family, was how the studio system took advantage of her vulnerabilities and then left her as she started to crumble under the weight of her false identity. According to Carson, who purportedly noticed the underlying discord between Monroe's emotional reality and the dehumanizing system that turned her into a commodity, she was too sensitive for the men who held her contract. The Marilyn Monroe that Carson learned about from people in the know was a paradox in and of herself. A very intelligent and creative lady who was repeatedly objectified and treated like a commodity. Those who benefited from her reputation relentlessly worked to discredit her whenever she tried to establish her credibility as an actress or take charge of her career. Johnny thought her life and death were equally tragic. His trusted confidante revealed that she was in a crowd, yet she felt utterly alone. Although millions of people loved her, she was hardly appreciated for her genuine self. He believed that few individuals could endure the chasm that existed between public adulation and private loneliness. Carson supposedly thought this was one of the worst stories in Hollywood, and Monroe's battles with addiction, despair, and potential exploitation by influential political leaders only made it worse. Those close to Carson say he never publicly speculated about his significant reservations about the official story of Monroe's death, but he did so privately. Monroe, Johnny realized, stood for more than the sum of her terrible life stories. The source went on to say she embodied the way Hollywood could take a real human being, transform them into a fantasy object, profit enormously from that transformation, and then discard them when the fantasy became unsustainable. In his view, she was the epitome of how an industry that consumed people and called it entertainment could end up with zero accountability. According to Carson's close associates, Monroe's story hit home for him since it depicted her struggle for authentic connection in a society that was only interested in her perfectionized self-image. Carson found the irony of her portrayal as the epitome of a self-assured sex icon at odds with her own profound insecurity and emotional fragility to be the most egregious joke that Hollywood had ever pulled, and he chose not to play along with it. Although Monroe's legendary fame guaranteed that her memory would live on, Carson supposedly felt the same sorrow for a gifted actor whose tragic demise occurred after he had essentially disappeared from the public eye as a reward. Jig Young, the Oscar winner whose films always feature a murder mystery, has been in a great many films, even though his name isn't as instantly recognizable as Marilyn Monroe's or Judy Garland's. Gig Young's tragic ending is one of the most stunning and unsettling in Hollywood history. Johnny Carson allegedly confided in intimate acquaintances that Young's story tormented him because it showed how a promising life may fall apart amid the intense pressures of Hollywood. It was the one fatality that Johnny couldn't joke about, according to his team. According to a former NBC colleague, Carson's incredible restraint for someone who made a living by finding humor in serious news speaks volumes about the profound impact of Young's tragic death on Carson. Gig Young had accomplished the unimaginable, the stuff of acting dreams. His performance in the 1969 film They Shoot Horses, Don't They brought him critical acclaim, financial success, and finally an Academy Award. According to Carson's contacts in the entertainment industry, despite Young's outwardly successful career, he was actually hiding a history of severe mental illness. Even if it meant hiding everything else, he always wanted to make the room laugh. Carson apparently noticed something about Young, seeing a trend among performers who use their charisma and comedy to mask their true selves. Carson allegedly noticed this quality in Young during their professional interactions, since he used comparable procedures in his own work. An open secret in Hollywood for decades was Young's struggle with alcoholism. According to what Carson discussed with confidence, he had obvious potential, but his addiction made him hard to work with, which meant he lost out on opportunities and suffered professional losses, which only made his personal decline worse. Despite being meant to be the apex of his career, Young's fall was hastened by the Oscar. Despite Young's high hopes that the award would catapult his career, reports indicate that offers for major roles have been steadily declining rather than rising. As per what Carson supposedly discovered, Johnny took the story of Young as an extreme case of Hollywood's despicable nature. His trusted confidante revealed, here was a man who reached the absolute summit of professional recognition, and it still wasn't enough to secure his position or heal his personal wounds. That Oscar became almost a mockery of his subsequent struggles. Young met his tragic end in 1978 when he shot his young bride, Kim Schmidt, after only 3 weeks of marriage before accidentally shooting himself. Carson saw this horrific murder as the pinnacle of the tragedy that can result from the industry's failure to intervene when people's mental health and addiction problems go untreated. Johnny couldn't shake the feeling that Young's case should have been so easy to foresee. The source continued: the alcoholism, the multiple failed marriages, the increasingly erratic behavior. These were all screaming warning signs that the industry collectively ignored until it ended in violence. Johnny saw it as a fundamental failure of basic human care, according to what Carson reportedly shared. He found it particularly disturbing that Young had been in and out of treatment for his alcoholism for years without receiving the sustained help he clearly needed. The entertainment industry's tendency to prioritize short-term productivity over long-term well-being struck Carson as a systemic problem that contributed directly to tragedies like Young's. Johnny believed Young's death represented a collective failure. His confidant explained, not just his own demons, but an entire system that exploits vulnerability, rewards self-destructive behavior when it's entertaining, and then acts shocked when the inevitable tragedy occurs. He saw Young as a victim not just of his own illness, but of an industry that should have protected him better. While Young's dramatic end came after years of visible struggle, Carson reportedly found equal tragedy in the story of a star whose fall from grace happened so completely that many fans didn't even realize she was gone until it was too late. All of the pictures that Alan and I made together were good commercial pictures, but not my favorites. Veronica Lake, from pinup icon to bartending in a hotel. During World War II, Veronica Lake's iconic peekaboo hairstyle became so popular that the US government asked her to change it because women working in factories were injuring themselves trying to maintain the look while operating machinery. Such was the influence of one of Hollywood's most distinctive stars of the 1940s. But according to what Johnny Carson reportedly shared with associates, Lake's precipitous fall from celebrity represented one of the industry's most sobering cautionary tales. She lit up wartime America and died almost totally forgotten. Carson supposedly remarked about Lake's tragic trajectory. This observation came not from direct interaction. Carson never interviewed Lake on The Tonight Show, but from what he learned about her fate through industry connections. According to what Carson told Confidence, what disturbed him most about Lake's story was the speed and completeness of her disappearance from public consciousness. There's nothing sadder than someone who still has the smile, but nowhere to take it, Carson reportedly observed, identifying the cruel reality of former stars who outlived their fame, but retained the memory of adoration. Lake's decline stemmed from a perfect storm of professional and personal challenges. Her reputation for being difficult on set, which Carson reportedly attributed partly to undiagnosed mental health issues, combined with changing public tastes and her struggles with alcoholism to make her increasingly unemployable by the early 1950s. Johnny saw Lake's story as particularly representative of women's experience in Hollywood. His confidant shared, "She was enormously valuable when she perfectly fit the image they wanted. Lovely, unique, and commercially viable. There was complete disregard for her welfare the minute her marketability declined." One of the most spectacular collapses from grace in Hollywood history ensued. After a career as one of the most famous faces in the business, the woman now works as a bartender at a New York hotel and a server in Miami. Jobs where her former fans occasionally recognized her, but frequently didn't believe her when she introduced herself. Industry insiders who knew Lake told Carson that her drinking worsened as her chances of success dwindled. She was unable to adequately treat her addiction and mental health issues since the business that had benefited from her image no longer provided her with any kind of support structure. It was unbearable to Johnny that the industry had utterly forsaken her. The source explained, Hare was a woman who had been on the cover of every magazine in America, who helped sell war bonds, whose image had been part of the national consciousness. And the same industry that built her up didn't offer even basic human support when she needed it most. Lakes' death in 1973 at age 50 from hepatitis and acute kidney injury related to her alcoholism went largely unnoticed by the public that had once adored her. According to what Carson reportedly told associates, he found it particularly disturbing that many Americans assumed she had died years earlier. So complete was her erasure from public consciousness. Johnny saw Lakes' tragedy as the industry's shameful secret. His confidence shared not just that stars fall from grace, but that the same system that profits from building them up takes no responsibility when the inevitable crash comes. He found that moral abandonment inexcusable. While Lake's story represented the industry's callous disregard for its former stars, another tragedy that reportedly affected Carson deeply involved a beloved television icon whose mysterious death remained shrouded in controversy. Round and around the rugged rocks, the ragged rascal ran. I look like Superman. Why? George Reeves, Superman's bullet. For a generation of American children in the 1950s, George Reeves was Superman, the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way through his portrayal of the Man of Steel in the television series Adventures of Superman. But according to what Johnny Carson reportedly shared with confidence, Reeves' story represented one of Hollywood's most troubling contradictions. A man celebrated for playing an invulnerable hero while feeling increasingly trapped and vulnerable in his own life. He saved the world for kids and nobody saved him. Carson supposedly remarked when discussing Reeves' tragic end. Carson grasped the special challenge Reeves faced as the actor playing a beloved yet more stifling iconic figure, and his insight was borne out by this assessment. Carson told associates that the disparity between public perceptions was what made Reeves' story so moving. Kids, confused about the difference between the actor and his indestructible role, would occasionally try to prove Reeves' invulnerability by kicking him in the shins or hurling objects at him. On the other hand, Reeves supposedly believed he was becoming too typecast to pursue the more serious dramatic parts he had previously desired. For a long time, Johnny dropped hints that George's death wasn't the way it appeared. According to a former NBC colleague, this was a reference to the 1959 death of Reeves and the dubious circumstances surrounding it, governed by the authorities, as yet beset by doubters and skeptics. Carson discovered via his Hollywood connections that Reeves had an entangled romance with Toni Manx, the wife of Eddie Manx, a formidable and possibly harmful person in the entertainment world, who was an executive at MGM. Some have speculated that Reeves's involvement with Leonard Lemon led to escalating tensions that ultimately led to his death. His confidant explained that Johnny was careful not to name names, but that Johnny still refused to accept the official story. A thorough inquiry, in his opinion, would have shown a more disturbing tale and that influential parties profited from the decision. Not only was Reeves' death a source of concern, but Carson allegedly saw his tragedy as a metaphor for how the entertainment industry could ensnare performers in the golden cage of their own fame. Even if playing Superman was the crowning triumph of his career, Reeves supposedly grew to despise the role, leading to deep emotional turmoil. The insider said that Johnny felt the special anguish of that circumstance to gain international fame for an issue about which you feel conflicted. To be publicly characterized by a role you've outgrown yet still can't shake. Very few people who aren't involved in the entertainment industry can really understand that kind of pain. According to Carson's statements to associates, he felt a special sense of tragedy over the fact that Reeves's portrayal of Superman both immortalized him in popular culture and may have hastened his demise. According to reports, the very performance that would make him famous also made him feel like his life had no purpose. Reeves' story had a bitter irony, which Johnny saw. The man who performed the role of the bullet stopper was discovered dead from a gunshot wound, and his friend said the circumstances surrounding his death left many questions unanswered. His life's greatest sorrow was the chasm that opened up between him and the heroic figure who seemed impervious to harm. Carson allegedly was profoundly affected by a final Hollywood tragedy involving a second enigmatic death that has sparked controversy for decades, even though many issues remain unsolved regarding the circumstances of Reeves's death. The last unsolved enigma in Hollywood was Natalie Wood. From her early years as a child star to her latter years as an adult, Natalie Wood was an adored figure in Hollywood because to her radiant performances in films such as Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and Splendor in the Grass. However, Johnny Carson allegedly told close acquaintances that the drowning of Wood in 1981 was the most unsettling, unsolved mystery in Hollywood, and that it still haunts the industry to this day. Her captor wasn't the water. As Carson purportedly mentioned to a trusted confidant while delving into the mystery surrounding Wood's death, it was the secrets that she was never permitted to divulge. With this cryptic remark, Carson seemed to be expressing her doubts about the official story of her death by drowning on Catalina Island with actor Christopher Walken and her husband, Robert Wagner. The people close to Carson say that he was acquainted with Wood and that he interviewed her several times on The Tonight Show over her career. Reportedly, he felt a unique sense of sorrow for her because of their personal connection. What began as a tragedy in the profession became the loss of a person he had known and respected. According to an associate, he allegedly told a buddy after her death, "She never felt safe, not even in love." This comment hinted to the complicated nature of Wood's relationship with her second husband, Wagner, and the ongoing speculation regarding his involvement in the circumstances surrounding her demise. Carson supposedly overheard contradicting tales regarding how and why Wood got into the sea, as well as a number of other incidents leading up to Wood's drowning, including arguments between Wagner and Walken, heavy drinking, and tensions on the yacht. Carson believed the official investigations were insufficient and that important concerns were left unsolved, according to his confidants. According to his acquaintance, Johnny was very careful not to make any direct allegations, but he let his loved ones know that he didn't agree with the first verdict of accidental death. In his view, influential groups were shielded from fair examination by powerful interests. Those close to Carson say that he found Wood's story terrible because it mirrored larger trends of female vulnerability in Hollywood, especially for those who started acting when they were young. The news of Wood's drowning was especially upsetting to anyone who knew of her severe phobia of dark water, which she supposedly got following a film shoot early in her career. Wood began performing at the tender age of 4. For Johnny, Wood's career path exemplified that of child stars. The Confidante said that, rather than having typical childhood experiences, her growth was influenced by studio expectations as she grew up on camera. A person's particular vulnerabilities formed in that type of environment can linger with them forever. Carson allegedly informed his associates that he thought it revealing that Wood's cause of death was reevaluated in 2011 from accidental drowning to drowning plus other unknown circumstances when the inquiry into her death was reopened. This change gave Carson hope that his long-standing reservations about the initial inquiry were well-founded. Johnny was under the impression that nobody would ever find out what happened that night. Too much time had gone by before his friend mentioned it. There were too many confirmed accounts and too many influential parties with a stake in preserving the status quo. It was the last unfinished tragedy, in his view, in Hollywood. The end of the life of a beloved star was a mystery and a source of conflict. The machine of devastation that is Hollywood, the system that supports the stars. A disturbing picture of the golden age of Hollywood is painted by the terrible stories of Judy Garland, Montgomery Clift, Marilyn Monroe, Gig Young, Veronica Lake, George Reeves, and Natalie Wood. Johnny Carson allegedly told close friends and family members near the end of his incredible career that these were not isolated incidents, but rather proof of systemic issues in the entertainment industry as a whole. The industry would produce stars, take advantage of their weaknesses, and then leave them when they stopped making money. A close colleague of Johnny's supposedly explained that Johnny didn't perceive these 7 catastrophes as distinct events. All 7 of them, in his view, were symptoms of the same underlying issue, an industry that carelessly used and discarded human beings, viewing them as just commodities. Although the details changed, the fundamental principle was the same. Because of this viewpoint, Carson was able to give her thoughts on these Hollywood disasters more substance than just sympathy. He allegedly had issues with the way the entertainment industry was structured, which led to the normalization of exploitation and the acceptance of human cost as an inevitable consequence of making popular entertainment. He was deeply upset not just by the occurrence of these catastrophes, but also by the fact that they occurred inside a system that practically guaranteed their occurrence. The confidant went on to say, both the individual's pain and the technology that routinely caused that agony were at the heart of the controversy. Carson supposedly disclosed that this apparatus functioned through a number of critical mechanisms that were present in each of these tragic accounts. To begin, the business would seek out impressionable individuals, such as youngsters like Judy Garland and Natalie Wood, or young adults, like many from problematic backgrounds who were especially receptive to manipulation due to their need for validation. Instead of addressing these vulnerabilities in healthy contexts, Hollywood used them as a means of control. Second, actors were often pressured to maintain fake personalities that were manufactured by the studio system, even when these characters did not reflect their true selves. Artists with fragile psyches, such as Marilyn Monroe and Montgomery Clift, found this inconsistency extremely taxing as they tried to balance their public personas with their inner lives. Third, in order to achieve short-term production targets, the industry occasionally permitted and even promoted self-destructive practices. As demonstrated in the instances of Gig Young, Veronica Lake, and Judy Garland, addiction problems that could have been handled sooner were instead tolerated or taken advantage of until they became unbearable. At last, the system that had nurtured stars simply forsook them when they grew uncontrollable or became too popular, severing not only their access to jobs, but also the social supports that were necessary to deal with the issues that the industry had contributed to. According to The Informant, Johnny realized he was a big TV personality who interviewed these celebrities and occasionally boosted their public perception. Thus, he was participating in this system. He himself was a cog in the wheel he decried. Because of that understanding, his introspective thoughts took on a deeper significance. He wasn't merely passing judgment, he was also taking responsibility for his part in the problematic dynamics. The results of this systemic research supposedly helped Carson arrive at a more complex understanding of responsibility, one that recognized both the role of the individual and the role of the environment in encouraging harmful behaviors. He took this knowledge of the dangers of public exposure into account when hosting his own show, where friends and colleagues saw that he frequently handled vulnerable guests with extra care. According to the source, Johnny's tone when discussing these Hollywood heavy hitters was anything but shallow pity or simple condemnation. It was done with a deep comprehension of the ways in which systems impact people's lives and the fact that there are instances when entertainment can lead to unethical human sacrifices. Instead of seeking to discredit legacies, he sought to comprehend patterns that persist in various guises, legacies honoring the completeness of humankind. Reportedly, Johnny Carson stressed throughout his career that revealing these facts wasn't about sensationalism or undermining creative accomplishments as he pondered these terrible Hollywood stories. Instead, it was about paying tribute to the whole humanity of these extraordinary people, recognizing not just their outstanding achievements, but also the frequently horrific conditions under which they achieved them. Johnny thought that the narrative surrounding the golden period of Hollywood was unfair to everyone. According to a confident source, Carson believed that it creates impossible standards based on fictions. It whitewashes genuine problems that persist today, and it fails to honor the real achievements of these artists by embedding them in fairy tales rather than human reality. His dedication to truthfulness included his perception of his own legacy. The people closest to him say he was adamant about telling his narrative the way it really was, flaws and all. In sharp contrast to the idealized stories commonly crafted around Hollywood icons, this method was grounded in reality. In the end, the person said, honesty was what Johnny cared about. Not flawless, the bravery to see the good and bad parts of every human narrative, but also the fact that no one is flawless was something he understood better than anyone. That's why he was so moved by these specific Hollywood disasters. The price of ignoring that basic complexity in humans was embodied by them. This candor on Hollywood's history, as Carson supposedly said, isn't about minimizing artistic accomplishments, but rather placing them in the right context. Knowing the context in which Judy Garland's magnificent performances were made makes them all the more impressive. Recognizing Montgomery Clift's personal struggles adds poignancy to his nuanced portrayals. Marilyn Monroe and other personalities like her were victims of institutional exploitation, which sheds light on the conditions under which their brilliance flourished rather than diminishes it. Johnny held the view that it is possible to appreciate art while being forthright about the systems that created it and the artists who created it. The confident continued, in fact, he felt that honest acknowledgement of flaws makes the genuine achievements more remarkable, not less. Real human beings creating lasting art despite their limitations and the constraints of their time. That's a more compelling story than sanitized myths about perfect stars. This nuanced perspective reportedly informed Carson's hope for how Hollywood might evolve, not through cancellation or wholesale rejection of the past, but through honest assessment that allows for genuine progress. By understanding the systemic issues that contributed to these tragedies, the industry might develop better ways to protect vulnerable talents in the future. He wasn't interested in tearing down idols for the sake of destruction, the source explained. He wanted to clear away illusions that prevent us from addressing persistent problems. The same dynamics of power, exploitation, and image management that defined the studio era continue in different forms today, acknowledging that history isn't about punishment, but about creating possibility for change.